Imagine a world where swords never cut through empires, where plows never carved the earth, where the gleam of gold or iron was never known to human eyes. What if humanity never discovered metal? Cities of stone would crumble under their own weight, wars fought with wood and bone, civilizations stalled in silence. No bronze, no steel, no iron age. Would we still rise? Or would we remain shadows in caves, whispering about a future that never arrived? Imagine a world without the shimmer of bronze, without the iron bite of a sword, without the silent gleam of steel catching the light of dawn. A world stripped of the very substance that forged our destiny, where the first sparks of civilization never ignite into empires, where the echoes of history sound quieter, more fragile, as if the weight of progress itself were held back by unseen hands. Here, in this alternate timeline, you walk barefoot across landscapes that never knew the metallic ring of hammer on anvil, never felt the resonance of ore pulled from the earth and transformed into power, and instead, humanity lingers in a twilight of stone, wood, and bone, locked in an endless rhythm of survival, scratching at the soil with crude tools, fighting wars with brittle obsidian edges that shatter in battle, shaping idols from rock because no other substance could outlast time. And yet, this is not merely an age delayed, but an existence reshaped. For without metal, there are no chariots to thunder across deserts, no bronze helmets to march under banners, no iron plows carving furrows deep into fertile ground, no golden ornaments crowning kings with divine legitimacy, no silver coins passing from hand to hand as trust embodied in shining form. Instead, trade remains bound to barter, fragile and limited. Economies stunted like saplings, unable to break the soil. Cities, if they rise at all, crumble easily in fire and rain, their wooden walls rotting, their stone foundations splintering, unable to support towers or bridges, unable to stand against centuries. And so the arc of humanity bends differently, slower, weaker, haunted by what never was, haunted by the absence of gleaming artifacts that would have told their story, haunted by the silence where there should have been the roar of smelting fires, the ringing of hammers, the clash of armies. For here, history itself feels like a shadow, stretched long and thin, fragile enough to vanish at a touch. And you, standing at the threshold of this ghostly vision, must ask, how far could humanity have truly risen without the marrow of metal in its bones, without the skeleton of steel to hold the weight of dreams, without the bronze spark to ignite ambition? And as the question lingers, so too does the eerie realization that perhaps everything you know, the skyscrapers piercing clouds, the railways carving continents, the satellites circling the stars, rests not on inevitability but on the fragile accident of discovery, an accident that, if denied, leaves humanity adrift in a timeless, silent age, an age where the absence of metal is not merely a gap in technology, but the unraveling of the very story of mankind. Stone became not just the tool of survival, but the ceiling of possibility, the substance to which all human effort returned, a companion both faithful and unyielding, shaping every movement of daily life. Imagine generations passing, fathers teaching sons to flake flint with patient strikes, mothers grinding grain between heavy slabs until their hands cracked, children learning the weight of stone before they ever learned the weight of dreams. For in this world, stone never gave way to something stronger, sharper, more malleable, and so its endurance became both salvation and prison. In villages scattered across forests and plains, people carved their lives from cliffs and rivers, using obsidian shards as knives, shaping basalt into axes, chiseling limestone into simple dwellings, and yet each creation bore the same limitation: fragile edges, heavy burdens, tools that dulled quickly and shattered often, demanding endless repetition, endless labor, endless improvisation. And because of this, progress moved at a pace so slow it was almost invisible, like a shadow stretching across centuries, barely shifting even as the sun of time moved overhead. Without the transformation of ore into bronze or iron, there were no revolutions of craft, no sudden leaps forward, no shattering of limits, only the persistence of the same familiar struggle, the same wearying cycle of trial and repair, of harvest cut short because stone sickles broke, of shelters collapsing because stone could not bend, of lives lost in battles where blades crumbled upon impact. Yet stone endured, and because it endured, humanity endured too. Crafting myths around, and it venerating boulders as sacred guardians, sculpting ancestors into statues that loomed with quiet authority, treating each polished surface as proof of skill, patience, and survival. And still, beneath the endurance there lingered a quiet despair, a sense that stone held secrets it would never reveal, that no matter how finely it was shaped, it would never open the door to something greater, never unlock the hidden fire sleeping beneath mountains, never grant humanity the wings of progress it secretly craved. And so the people of this alternate earth lived as if trapped in a long twilight, with stone tools clutched tightly in hand, shaping a world that was always the same, a world that resisted transformation, where ingenuity fought against the hard walls of geology, and history itself slowed to a crawl, dragging its feet across a landscape littered with broken shards, whispers of what could have been, but never was. If only the endurance of stone had been challenged. If only humanity had found a way to surpass the rock that both protected and confined them. If stone was the backbone of endurance, then wood and bone became the flesh and sinew of daily struggle, fragile materials pressed into roles they were never strong enough to bear, and yet humanity clung to them with desperate creativity, carving antlers into hooks, fashioning femurs into flutes, sharpening ribs into daggers that snapped with one mistimed strike, while trees surrendered branches to be hardened in fire. Spears with splintered tips thrust toward prey that could outrun or overpower their wielders. Effie in this world felt brittle, every invention balanced on the edge of failure, every tool carrying with it the knowledge of how quickly it could break, leaving hands empty and lives exposed to the indifference of nature. And because of this fragility, people lived in constant negotiation with their environment, binding weapons with sinew, reinforcing them with resin, praying that the next hunt, the next defense, the next harvest would not end in ruin when wood cracked or bone shattered. Children grew up surrounded by the sound of mending, the rasp of bone against stone to sharpen edges, the creak of bows drawn too tightly, the snapping that followed like a cruel echo of hope. And in these failures, the rhythm of existence was set: brief victories, followed by setbacks, fragile triumphs balanced against relentless loss. Societies built on such breakable foundations were themselves unstable, never able to scale beyond the fragility of their tools. And so battles were messy collisions of splintered wood, shields splintering under pressure, bone blades crumbling in the heat of combat, victories decided not by superior arms but by stamina, by cunning, by sheer survival. Yet in this fragility lay a strange intimacy, for tools were not inherited across centuries, not polished into heirlooms, but constantly remade, constantly replaced, teaching each generation the same hard lessons, binding them in a cycle of renewal that felt both comforting and suffocating. Myths grew around the snapping of bone, omens read in the patterns of splinters, rituals crafted from the breakage of bows or the sudden fracture of spears, as if the fragility itself had become a language through which the gods whispered their approval or discontent. But still, fragility meant limits, meant ceilings that could not be broken, meant horizons that seemed forever out of reach. And so humanity lived on, cradled by wood and bone, yet haunted by how easily those cradles collapsed. A world where every tool, every weapon, every structure carried within it the seed of failure, and that seed ensured that no matter how much people dreamed of permanence, the truth remained unavoidable. Their world was built on what could not last. If you're fascinated by this dark alternate history, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon. On this channel, we unravel the biggest historical mysteries, alternate timelines, and lost civilizations. Don't miss our next deep dive into the secrets that shaped humanity's fate. Subscribe now and join the journey into history's shadows. Without the plow, the earth itself became humanity's greatest adversary. Each field a battleground not against enemies, but against the stubborn weight of soil that refused to yield. And so men and women bent their backs day after day, scraping with sticks hardened in fire, clawing at the ground with flat stones bound to wooden handles, or pulling weeds by hand until their fingers bled. For without metal blades to cut deep furrows, the harvest remained meager, fragile, and uncertain. Imagine entire villages gathered in muddy fields, children scattering seeds by hand, elders pressing them into shallow grooves carved with bone spades, while rain and wind mocked their efforts, washing seed away, eroding fragile rows, leaving hunger in its place. Crops grew patchy, yields small, and the constant fear of famine hung over every season, making the rhythm of survival a fragile negotiation with the land itself, where one failed harvest could unravel years of effort. Without strong plows to open the earth, there could be no great expansion of farmland, no broad fields feeding thousands, no granaries swelling with surplus, and thus population remained thin, scattered, forever balanced on the edge of scarcity. Villages clung to riverbanks, where the soil was softer, or to valleys where hand tools could scratch the surface. Yet even there the work was endless, the soil hardening again with each season, demanding fresh struggle, and so children inherited not wealth or land but exhaustion, a legacy of bending, pulling, tearing, always close to the edge of starvation. The absence of the plow meant the absence of freedom, for surplus was the key to leisure, to innovation, to the rise of culture. And here there was none, only the ceaseless cycle of subsistence, the constant vigilance against nature's indifference, the gnawing awareness that life itself was fragile, precarious, and bound by the shallow reach of crude tools. In this world, hunger became the silent ruler, dictating choices, shaping rituals, turning every meal into a victory, every winter into a trial, every spring planting into a gamble that might or might not return enough grain to keep death at bay. And so agriculture, instead of being humanity's great liberation, remained a chain, binding people to small plots of land, to fragile methods, to the endless struggle of soil against flesh, a struggle they could never fully win because without the plow, the earth would never truly open. Without the power of metal to shape foundations, reinforce walls, or lift great stones into place, humanity never knew the skyline of cities, never felt the pulse of crowded streets alive with markets and monuments. And instead, the world remained a patchwork of villages scattered like seeds across valleys, forests, and riverbanks, each small, vulnerable, and temporary. Built from timber that rotted in the rains, clay that cracked in the sun, and stone laid loosely because no iron tools existed to cut it into precision. Picture a landscape where no towers pierced the horizon, no citadels guarded the night, no bridges spanned rivers to connect trade, but only clusters of huts huddled against the elements, smoke rising thinly from their roofs as storms beat down and flames consumed them with cruel ease. For without bronze nails or iron hinges or steel beams, architecture could never stretch upward or endure the centuries, and so memory itself became fragile. Cultures unable to leave behind monuments that could outlast their makers, temples that crumbled in decades, halls of leaders that sagged into mud and grass, legacies washed away like footprints in the tide. In such a world, there were no bustling capitals to draw strangers together, no arenas echoing with the shouts of thousands, no marble streets or glowing lamps guiding travelers at night, but only silence broken by the creak of wooden palisades, the chatter of small gatherings, the whispers of fear each time fire threatened to sweep through, each time wines toppled walls, each time floods swallowed homes. Politics too shrank to the scale of the village. No kings ruling empires from shining thrones, no bureaucracies to organize armies, no palaces to awe subjects into obedience, for power could not expand without the permanence of stone and metal to anchor it. And so leadership remained fragile, contested, often fleeting, dissolving when disaster struck or harvests failed. Imagine history without Athens, without Rome, without Babylon, without the shadow of cities that grew into civilizations, and you see instead an earth where memory is oral, where myth replaces record, where nothing solid stands to remind the future of what came before. A cycle of rise and fall so small and so frequent that history itself feels shallow, like ripples in a pond instead of waves upon a shore. In this world, cities never rise, and because they never rise, humanity never rises with them. bound always to the smallness of its fragile shelters, dreaming of permanence but condemned to impermanence. When no gleaming bronze idols or golden crowns existed to capture divinity, when no iron bells rang through temples, humanity's gaze turned to what remained unyielding and eternal, the stone underfoot and the endless sky above, and from these two anchors they carved their gods, worshipped not in towering sanctuaries or gilded shrines but in circles of boulders raised by weary hands, in cairns piled upon hills, in crude faces etched into cliffs where shadows seemed to breathe with the coming of dusk. Imagine a world where faith was not adorned by gleam, but defined by weight and silence. Prayers spoken into winds that tore across mountains, rituals carved into valleys with nothing more than persistence and crude chisels. The sky treated as a shifting canvas of omens and promises. Every thunderstorm a messenger, every star a guardian, every eclipse a terror. In the absence of metal, religion grew raw, unpolished, elemental, tethered to the permanence of stone and the mystery of sky. Gods imagined as immovable monoliths or celestial wanderers, deities whose bodies were cliffs and rivers, whose voices were storms, whose eyes were comets blazing across blackness. Believers knelt not before gilded altars but before weathered rocks, surfaces rubbed smooth by generations of hands, offerings of grain or bone left at their base, smoke curling upward as if to remind the heavens that humanity still waited, still begged, still endured. Myths deepened around these stone guardians, tales of mountains that walked, of skies that cracked open, of spirits that demanded sacrifice. Because without the glitter of precious metals to separate divine from mundane, the line between earth and heaven blurred, worship carried the heaviness of survival itself, ritual becoming a desperate negotiation with forces too vast to be tamed. And yet within this austerity there was reverence, a sense of scale unsoftened by ornament, believers confronting the immensity of the world without the illusion of human mastery, humbled by the hardness of stone, awed by the boundlessness of sky. Their gods vast, unreachable, and indifferent, yet close enough to be felt in every storm, every quake, every shifting star. Faith became not a matter of wealth displayed in temples, but of endurance carried in silence. A religion written not in scripture etched onto durable metal, but in stories passed through voices, fragile as breath, vulnerable as memory, yet alive, whispered beneath stars, carried in chants across valleys, woven into the sound of drums made of stretched hide. And so, humanity, bereft of bronze idols or iron sanctuaries, found its gods in stone and sky, deities that endured not because of human craft, but because they could not be moved. And in their endurance, people saw eternity. In their silence, they saw power. Without coins forged from silver, gold, or copper, trade became a delicate dance of necessity. Every exchange a conversation, every bargain an act of trust or suspicion. For in this world the shimmer of currency never emerged to standardize value, never granted the stability of weight and stamp. And so people bartered, carrying bundles of grain, skins of oil, carved beads, baskets of salt, obsidian blades, or woven cloth, to markets that were less centers of wealth than gatherings of negotiation. Each trade a story in itself. Picture a farmer traveling for days with sacks of barley strapped to his back, hoping to exchange them for a jar of honey or a few strips of dried fish. His worth measured not in the universal shine of coin, but in the hunger of his counterpart, the urgency of the season, the mood of the gathering. And when disagreements arose, arguments flared, for there was no fixed medium to resolve value, only fragile trust, and the shifting balance of power between giver and taker. Caravans still stretched across deserts and forests, but they carried not metals stamped into universal value but cumbersome goods, each vulnerable to spoilage, theft, or rot, each trade slowed by haggling, suspicion, and the need to measure worth anew each time. And so, long-distance trade faltered, its reach shortened, its rhythm broken by the absence of currency's efficiency. The great networks that once bound empires together with roads and marketplaces never blossomed, because without coins to flow like blood, economies remained fractured, small, provincial, forever local, villages bound to villages, tribes to tribes, each exchange tenuous, often sealed not by metal but by ritual, by kinship, by fragile oaths sworn before stone altars or under the vast indifference of the sky. Wealth became measured not in treasure hoarded but in herds that wandered, in harvests stacked in clay jars, in shells strung into necklaces, each vulnerable to theft, decay, or accident. And thus insecurity haunted every attempt at accumulation. Mistrust grew because value was subjective, changeable, dependent on circumstance. And this mistrust slowed the weaving of civilizations into something larger, something permanent. Imagine a market alive, not with the clink of coins, but with the weight of goods passed hand to hand, goats tethered and bleeding, baskets overturned for inspection, voices raised in protest or persuasion, each transaction heavy, fragile, uncertain, yet necessary. For without coins, humanity still had hunger, still had desire, still had need. And so it found ways to trade, stumbling forward without the gleam of stamped silver to smooth its path, surviving in the fragile realm of barter but never truly flourishing. War without metal was not the clash of swords or the thunder of armored legions, but something rawer, messier, more intimate, a chaos of splintering wood, cracking bone, and blood spilled by weapons that broke as often as they killed. Imagine warriors painted with ash and clay, gripping spears tipped with fire, hardened wood or obsidian shards that shattered on impact. Their shields woven from reeds or animal hides stretched tight, their armor nothing more than layers of bark or leather, offering little defense against the sharpened sticks of their enemies. And so battles became frenzied storms of bodies, where strength, speed, and fury mattered more than discipline or formation, where warriors lunged and grappled, where fights devolved into fists and teeth, once weapons splintered in the dust. Without bronze swords or iron axes, armies could not march in disciplined ranks, could not overwhelm villages with the crushing force of metallurgy, and so wars remained small, tribal, confined to skirmishes between neighboring groups over hunting grounds, water sources, or patches of arable land, each conflict leaving ruin but never birthing empires, each victory fleeting, each conquest fragile. Death came swiftly in these battles. Yet survival often hinged less on weapons than on cunning ambushes in forests, traps dug into the earth, fires set to spread panic tactics born of desperation rather than organized strategy. And the outcome of wars was written less in territory gained than in the survival of families, the scattering of tribes, the memory of blood debts carried for generatio. Ns. There were no iron helmets gleaming in the sun, no bronze chariots thundering across plains, no steel blades passed down as heirlooms, only crude tools that broke with time, leaving little behind but fragments buried in soil, shards that told of struggles as fleeting as smoke. And yet within this fragility lay a strange savagery, for without metal to dull the intimacy of killing, war remained face to face, hand to hand, every death personal, every victory earned in proximity to another's breath, another's scream, another's final gaze. Stories of these wars grew into myth. Warriors remembered not for the weapons they wielded but for the ferocity of their spirit, their ability to endure when tools failed, their cunning in turning the earth itself into an ally. But wars fought without metal never reached the scale of empire, never forged civilizations through conquest, never reshaped continents, and so the map of humanity remained fragmented, scattered tribes in perpetual conflict, none able to dominate long enough to bind others beneath their will, a world where war was constant yet small, savage yet limited, blood spilled endlessly but history itself never pushed forward by it, for without the weight of metal in hand, war could destroy but never truly build. Imagine history stripped of its greatest names, the chronicles of empires erased before they could ever be written. For without metal, there was no Egypt rising from the sands, with bronze-chased chariots and golden crowns, no Rome conquering continents beneath iron standards, no China forging dynasties with steel at air command. What would remain were scattered tribes clinging to river valleys, their villages small, their monuments fleeting, their influence fading before it could spread, because empires require permanent armies that endure, infrastructures that connect, cities that dominate, and none of this could be built, when the very foundations cracked under the weight of ambition. In this alternate history, the Nile still floods, but no pyramids rise to honor kings, no bronze tools shape limestone into eternity, only modest tombs of mud brick melting back into dust with each passing century. In Mesopotamia, the rivers still carve fertile crescents, but there are no ziggurats crowned with gleaming copper, no legions of metal-armed warriors to enforce order, only clay tablets that crumble, reed huts that vanish, and kingdoms that never unify into something lasting. The Mediterranean remains a sea of scattered traders in wooden boats, fragile vessels hugging coasts, never the mighty triremes of Athens or the colossal navy of Carthage. And so, no classical world emerges, no Athens to question existence, no Rome to spread its law, no Byzantium to preserve its faith, only silence where history's grand theaters might have been. In Asia, without iron plows to feed multitudes or steel swords to defend dynasties, the Yellow River is lined with tribes rather than emperors. Legends whisper of dragon spirits instead of Han armies, memory passed in song instead of carved in bronze. And across the Americas, obsidian still cuts deep. Yet without metal the Aztecs, the Maya, the Inca never rise into empires of stone and gold, their monuments smaller, their reach shorter, their legacies more fragile. The absence of empires is not merely the absence of conquest, but the absence of cultural fusion, for it was through empires that languages spread, religions mingled, technologies diffused, and without them humanity stays fragmented, ideas contained, knowledge isolated, brilliance flickering, and then extinguished, before it can leap from one people to another. Imagine a world where the names of kings are unknown, where no Caesar strides across history, no pharaoh commands eternity, no emperor bends nations beneath his will, where human ambition remains local, fragile, and fleeting. And you begin to see the scale of loss, a silence where triumph should echo, a void where grandeur should stand, the lost empires that never rose because the metals that might have built them remained forever hidden beneath the earth. The Renaissance as you know it never dawns in a world without metal, for the very tools that chiseled marble into David, that etched words onto paper through the press, that strung wires to ring bells of invention, remain absent. And so the great rebirth of knowledge and art collapses before it can even breathe. Picture Europe in perpetual dusk, villages huddled in wooden homes that sag with age, scholars reciting wisdom by firelight, but unable to multiply it beyond fragile parchment, their quills scratching by hand what a metal press might have unleashed in thousands. The ideas of Plato and Aristotle, if remembered at all, flicker like shadows told from mouth to mow. Youth, too fragile to cross borders, too limited to seed revolution. Without iron compasses and sextants, no caravels cross the seas to bring new worlds into old maps. And so continents remain strangers. Humanity divided by oceans, it cannot truly master. Artists, deprived of fine chisels and durable paints mixed with mineral powders, carve in wood that rots, paint in colors that fade, build in clay that collapses, their genius erased within a generation, their names lost to silence. The domes of Florence never rise. The cathedrals never soar with spires that defy the sky. For stone cut without metal tools can never achieve precision, never reach for heaven, never inspire awe. The Renaissance was a flowering of both mind and hand, but here the hand is crippled, unable to give shape to imagination, unable to transform vision into permanence. And so, imagination itself shrinks, discouraged by fragility, weighed down by impermanence. Knowledge exists, yes, but it is scattered, fragile, localized, like seeds falling on barren ground, never spreading wide enough to change the soil of history, never feeding revolutions of thought. Galileo never lifts his telescope toward the stars. Da Vinci never sketches his machines. Michelangelo never frees angels from stone, because the instruments of their genius do not exist. The chisels, the presses, the lenses, the gears, all denied by the absence of metal, and so humanity stumbles through centuries without awakening, trapped in the long shadow of survival, its art ephemeral, its science halted, its vision clouded. A world where the Renaissance is not delayed but missing altogether. A rebirth that never arrives. a light that never pierces the darkness, and in that absence, you can feel the weight of what is lost, the potential to see ourselves anew, the courage to reshape the world, the belief that human hands, guided by tools, could reach for the divine. The Industrial Revolution, that thunderous moment when coal roared in furnaces, iron rails split continents, and steel towers clawed at the sky, never arrives in a world without metal, and so humanity remains bound to the slow rhythm of hand and beast, its ambitions throttled by the fragility of wood and the weight of stone. Imagine fields still tilled by calloused hands, carts dragged by oxen across rutted earth, villages lit only by flickering fires, because no wires, no engines, no machines exist to carry light further than the reach of flame. Coal may lie buried beneath mountains, yet without iron tools it remains locked away, unreachable, a secret the earth keeps forever. And even if flames lick at wood and charcoal, there are no boilers to trap the steam, no pistons to turn it into motion, no gears to translate it into industry. Workshops remain simple huts, filled with artisans chiseling wood, weaving cloth, grinding grain by hand, their craft skillful but limited, their products precious but scarce, because scale, that miracle of industry, is forever out of reach. Roads remain muddy tracks, their bridges sagging timber that collapse under too much weight. For without iron nails or steel beams, there is no permanence in travel, no locomotives to conquer distance, no factories to concentrate labor, no mills to turn rivers into engines of power. And because of this, the population never surges beyond what the soil can feed. Hunger always crouching nearby, progress stunted, ideas contained. Imagine no trains carving through mountains, no ships of steel mastering oceans, no smokestacks blotting the sky with their promise of transformation, no humming of engines, no whistle of steam, only the same weary rhythm of wood wheels creaking and bodies bending beneath labor. Generation after generation, the industrial age was not merely about machines, it was about liberation from limits, about multiplying human effort into something vast, something unstoppable. But in this world, without metal, effort stays small, fragile, dependent on muscle and patience, unable to leap into the exponential. History never accelerates, never breaks free of the weight of centuries. And so humanity's timeline remains flat, a long plateau of survival, instead of a soaring arc of invention. In this silence, you feel the absence not just of engines but of everything they carried. The printing of mass knowledge, the weaving of global markets, the rise of cities glowing with artificial light, the idea that humanity could grow faster than its hunger. The industrial age never comes, and because it never comes, the dream of progress remains only that, a dream, whispered in the dark but never forged into fire. Flight, that ancient dream whispered in myths of Icarus and sketched in the notebooks of visionaries, never lifts from the ground in a world without metal, for wings of wood snap under strain, fabrics woven without iron needles unravel too quickly, and engines, those roaring hearts of aviation, remain unborn, leaving humanity bound to the soil like trees that yearn but cannot move. Imagine endless skies stretching above farmers and hunters, blue oceans of possibility forever, out of reach, storms rolling with indifference, birds soaring as reminders of what could never be, their effortless arcs a cruel contrast to human frailty. Boats made of timber still crawl along coastlines. Fragile rafts tied with fiber still drift rivers, but across vast seas the journeys are perilous, the vessels flimsy, the maps forever incomplete. For without steel to sheath hulls or iron nails to bind frames, no great ships explore, no global crossings redraw the world, and continents remain distant strangers, divided by water they cannot truly conquer. In villages scattered across valleys, people tilt their faces to the heavens, imagining gods who can travel where they cannot, weaving stories of spirits who soar while humanity is condemned to crawl, longing etched into every legend, desire seeded into every tale, yet always left unsatisfied. Kites flutter in childish games, gliders crash in desperate experiments, but the dream never matures, never evolves. Because without metal gears, without riveted frames, Without engines forged from steel and aluminum, flight remains fantasy, a vision spoken around fires but never embodied in sky. Armies march on foot, traders walk or ride across wilderness, messages travel by word of mouth or written script carried on backs, distance forever dictating the pace of history, isolation defining the fate of nations. Imagine no aerial view of Earth, no photographs of clouds from above, no satellites to map the stars, no moon landing to crown human ambition, only the silence of skies untouched, a void where progress should echo. And so humanity lives as though chained to the ground, its imagination always straining upward, but its hands always failing. Each failed leap a reminder of boundaries never broken. Each fallen glider a metaphor for a species capable of dreaming, but not of soaring. The flight that never takes off is more than the absence of machines. It is the absence of freedom, the absence of possibility, the absence of the perspective that comes only when the earth is seen from above, fragile and whole. And so humanity remains small, local, earthbound, never knowing what it feels like to rise. In a world without steel, medicine never escapes the realm of desperation and ritual. For without scalpels that slice with precision or needles that pierce cleanly, healing remains crude, improvised, and bound to the limits of bone, wood, and stone. Imagine a healer crouched in the dim glow of firelight, gripping a shard of obsidian to lance an infection, its edge sharp but fragile, prone to snapping mid-cut and leaving splinters in flesh, while the patient writhes without anesthesia, prayers whispered louder than screams, herbs stuffed into wounds in place of sutures, bones set with splints made from sticks, and blood loss accepted as an unavoidable tax of survival. Surgeries are rare, dangerous, often fatal, for no tools exist to open bodies safely, no clamps to hold vessels, no stainless steel instruments to fight infection. And so, most injuries are left to fester, most diseases to run their course, life expectancy collapsing under the weight of what cannot be cured. Childbirth remains a perilous gamble, mothers bleeding with no forceps to assist, no scalpels for emergency procedures, no sterile needles to stitch torn flesh. And so families bury as often as they celebrate, grief a shadow at every cradle. Infection reigns as the true master of life, for without steel to craft clean tools, wounds are never sterile. Pus and fever follow even the smallest cut, and plagues sweep unchecked. They're spread unbroken by vaccination needles that never existed, their toll remembered in whispered stories of entire villages silenced. Knowledge of the body remains shallow. Anatomy, char itch 1, TED only through myth or guesswork, because dissection with stone knives is imprecise, messy, destructive, offering little insight. And so science stagnates, healing left to charms, chants, and herbs that soothe but rarely save. Hospitals never rise as sanctuaries of recovery, for without durable instruments and metal tables, such spaces collapse into little more than huts of incense and prayer, their success measured not in cures but in survival against odds stacked by nature's indifference. And yet, within this fragility, people cling to rituals, carving talismans of bone to ward off sickness, boiling roots in endless combinations in search of remedies, tying cloth charms around children's necks in the hope of protection. Their medicine, as much faith as practice, their survival as much chance as skill. But the truth remains brutal. Without steel, medicine is not progress but endurance, not mastery but submission, a slow acceptance that the body is frail, that healing is uncertain, that life itself is brief. And so every breath becomes both a victory and a reminder of what is forever missing. The night sky, eternal and untouchable, becomes both a comfort and a torment in a world without metal. For though the stars burn with their silent invitation, humanity has no means to answer, no tools to build telescopes that pierce deeper into the heavens, no copper wires to channel signals, no rockets of steel to break the gravity of Earth. And so the cosmos remains forever a ceiling of mystery, beautiful yet unreachable. Imagine villagers gathered around fires, their eyes lifting to constellations that whisper of gods and destinies, their stories woven from light patterns they cannot measure. Myths pass through generations instead of maps charted by instruments. The heavens a canvas for imagination, but never for science. The moon still pulls the tides, but no one sets foot upon its dust. No footprints mark its silence. No flag plants its claim. And the dream of leaving Earth remains confined to prayers and songs. Across valleys and deserts, shamans lift their hands toward comets. Prophets interpret eclipses as omens. But no astronomer grinds glass into lenses to study them. No mathematician builds instruments to measure their arc. No observatory rises from stone to record their cycles. And so knowledge of the cosmos remains fragmented, a fragile mythology rather than a shared science. Even if someone imagines a vessel to soar, wood splinters, cloth tears, bone breaks, and the sky refuses entry, its gates sealed by the absence of alloys strong enough to withstand the fire of ascent. The silence of the stars grows heavier with each generation, a reminder of human smallness, a reminder that without metal, humanity is bound to earth, like insects beneath glass, aware of the vastness above but denied the wings to reach it. Messages cannot be sent across the void, for no radios exist, no satellites orbit, no signals whisper between planets. And so if other civilizations look outward, they see nothing, hear nothing, as if humanity never lived at all, as if the earth itself were silent in the grand chorus of the universe. In this silence, dreams become resignation. The sky revered as divine but never challenged. Constellations turned into eternal prisons of imagination. And humanity grows old beneath stars that never change, forever spectators to a cosmic play they cannot join. The silence of the stars is not simply absence, but a wound, a hollow in the human spirit where curiosity should have soared, a reminder that the heavens, without the gift of metal, remain untouchable, eternal, and indifferent. Denied the gift of metal, humanity gropes toward other possibilities, grasping at substitutes that might hold the weight of progress, experimenting with ceramics hardened in fire, glass blown into fragile vessels of light, resins drawn from trees and hardened into brittle shapes, fibers woven tighter and tighter until ropes could lift more than flesh alone. Imagine great furnaces not smelting iron but firing endless clay, potters elevated to engineers, their kilns glowing day and night, bricks and vessels serving not as art but as the very skeleton of society, fragile yet indispensable, shattering easily yet replaced in abundance. Glass too becomes a material of fascination, blown into windows that capture the sun, vessels that preserve food, and lenses that, though crude, offer glimpses of the distant and the small, but always at risk of fracture, a single slip undoing months of work, knowledge literally splintering in the hands of its makers. Bone and horn are pressed into stranger rolls, carved into hinges, bent into fasteners, polished into instruments, even shaped into crude tools of measurement. Though none last, each object a temporary experiment, each invention vulnerable to time. Even plants are forced into unnatural labor, their fibers soaked, twisted, layered into cloths, ropes, and mats strong enough to replace what nails or wires might have done, but always at the mercy of decay, insects, or rot. Some dreamers look toward stone not as flaked shards, but as carefully engineered composites, great slabs layered and bound with resin, their weight enormous, but their peak potential undeniable, though transport and shaping demand entire villages to cooperate, exhausting their bodies against the stubborn mass. In coastal villages, shells and corals are used like currency, not only as symbols of wealth, but as actual materials, ground into powder for pigments, layered into structures, polished into decoration, a fragile echo of what coins might have been. Yet for all these experiments, the truth remains that alternate technologies cannot match the adaptability of metal. Each substitute serving briefly, failing quickly, replaced endlessly, their promise forever limited, their brilliance forever dulled by impermanence. Still, in this world, innovation does not stop. It adapts, fragile as glass but stubborn as stone, each generation pushing clay, fiber, resin, and bone a little further, carving dreams into brittle materials, chasing permanence through impermanence, a testament to humanity's unwillingness to surrender, even when the elements of progress are denied. Yet the fragility of these substitutes shapes a civilization very different from our own, one where invention is constant but survival is uncertain, one where nothing built endures beyond centuries, one where the very idea of technology is not stability but improvisation, an endless cycle of creation and collapse. Civilization without metal is like a house built on sand, fragile at its foundations, unable to withstand the weight of time. And so the human story becomes one of endless building and endless collapse. A cycle in which villages swell into towns, but soon crumble, their walls of CLI dissolving in rain, their wooden structures devoured by rot, their monuments reduced to rubble within a generation. Picture societies rising with ambition, leaders declaring themselves chosen by gods, rituals binding communities together, yet always undermined by the fragility of their own creations. Every drought exposing the weakness of their storage, every storm sweeping away their homes, every fire consuming centuries of effort in hours. Records vanish easily, for tablets of clay crack, scrolls of bark decay, memory stored in fragile vessels that do not last. And so history becomes shallow, a thin layer of recollection that cannot reach beyond living memory. Civilizations forced to rediscover the same truths again and again because nothing survives long enough to anchor knowledge. Power, too, remains brittle. Rulers unable to impose their will over distance because no lasting roads can be built, no enduring fortresses can defend their lands, no weapons strong enough to dominate enemies for long. And so authority remains local, fragile as the structures that shelter it, dynasties collapsing with the death of a single leader, tribes splintering after disputes, no empire stretching far or enduring long. Trade routes open and close like veins, severed by floods, blocked by landslides, or broken by the decay of vessels. Commerce forever, a fragile experiment, never a solid network. And yet within this fragility there is a strange intimacy, for communities remain small, bound tightly by necessity, survival forcing cooperation, every life dependent on the endurance of neighbors, every home a collective responsibility, every disaster a shared grief. Still, fragility shapes culture into one of constant impermanence. Art made of wood or fiber disappearing before descendants can inherit it, songs surviving longer than monuments, myths carried farther than tools, voices becoming the true carriers of civilization because all else crumbles. Imagine living in a world where every generation builds anew, where the ruins of the past are little more than faint traces beneath the soil, where permanence itself is an illusion, and you begin to feel the burden of fragility pressing down upon humanity's shoulders, a weight heavier than stone, a truth harsher than famine, that without metal, civilization cannot endure. It can only persist, fragile as breath, fleeting as smoke, forever rebuilding what it cannot preserve. In the absence of metal, humanity remains locked in what might be called the age of eternal stone, an epoch without end where flint, obsidian, and granite are not relics of a forgotten era, but the unchanging backbone of existence, shaping every tool, every weapon, every dwelling, every ritual, as though time itself has ceased to move forward. Imagine millennia passing with little difference. A child born in 1 century living the same life as an ancestor from 10 centuries before, learning to knap flint with the same strikes, to fashion axes from the same quarries, to hunt with the same brittle points, the rhythm of life unchanged, because the ceiling of technology never lifts. In this frozen age, progress is not revolution, but repetition. Innova, shun not breakthrough but variation. New generations rediscovering what their elders already knew, making slight refinements in technique, but never escaping the confines of stone's limitations. Societies rise and fall in endless cycles, villages forming, flourishing briefly, then dissolving into dust when famine, flood, or conflict comes, leaving behind only scattered stones that are soon reused by the next settlement. History repeating itself endlessly, because nothing solid survives to preserve memory or knowledge. Myths deepen because the past cannot be recorded with permanence. Stories of ancestors blurred into legend, victories and losses exaggerated into epics. The line between truth and imagination dissolving because there are no lasting monuments to anchor reality. Rulers, if they exist, are remembered not for palaces or armies, but for the tales sung about their cunning or cruelty. Oral tradition, the only thread binding centuries together. And yet there is beauty in this eternity. For humans carve their identity into stone art, painting caves, shaping idols, erecting standing stones aligned with the stars, gestures of defiance against impermanence, though even these erode with time, leaving faint traces that future generations interpret as messages from gods rather than works of men. The age of eternal stone is both cradle and prison, nurturing humanity long enough for it to survive, but denying it the means to ascend, keeping it tethered to earth, to fragility, to endless cycles that promise continuity but not transformation. Imagine standing on a ridge, looking across a land dotted with fires, hearing the echoes of stone tools striking, knowing that these same sounds filled the air 1,000 years before and will fill it 1,000 years after, unchanged, eternal, and you begin to feel the weight of this age, an age without progress, an age without escape, an age where humanity lives, dreams, suffers, and dies with stone always in hand, stone always underfoot, stone always defining the boundary between what is possible and what is forever denied. In a world without metal, the very concept of power, electricity humming through wires, engines roaring, turbines spinning is nothing but an unspoken dream, a possibility never imagined, because the tools to summon it never exist. And so humanity lives in a perpetual twilight, where fire remains the only light, flickering against cave walls, glowing in clay lamps, smoldering in hearths that choke rooms with smoke. Imagine nights stretching endlessly dark, villages wrapped in silence except for the crackle of burning wood, no lamps to scatter shadows, no grids to connect households, no switch to command the presence of light, only the dependence on flame that consumes forests faster than they can grow back. Rivers still rush, winds still howl, sun still blazes overhead, yet none of these forces are ever captured, never harnessed into motion. For without iron to forge gears or copper to weave wires, energy remains wild, indifferent, and untamed. Nature holding its strength close, while humanity struggles with muscle and fire alone. Mills of stone and wood groan under strain, ropes of fiber fray, wheels splinter, every attempt at harnessing the world undone by fragility, leaving people forever bound to the slow pace of their own hands. The aching pull of beasts, the fleeting rush of fire, communication crawls across landscapes at the speed of footsteps, letters carried by weary messengers, voices shouted across valleys, stories fading before they reach their intended ears. For there are no telegraphs clicking with coded messages, no radios carrying voices through the air, no lights whispering data from orbit, only silence stretched across distance, isolation reigning as the natural state of human life. And because no power exists to drive machines, no factories rise to multiply effort, no locomotives race across continents, no ships with steel hulls break oceans, no planes lift skyward, and so humanity never learns to collapse distance, never learns to live in a truly connected world. Each community remains a small island, fragile and self-contained, its rhythms dictated by sun and season, its possibilities limited by what flesh and fire alone can manage. Imagine the frustration of minds sharp enough to dream, but denied the means to manifest. Inventors sketching in dirt, philosophers imagining impossible forces, their visions dissolving with each rainstorm, because nothing exists to preserve them, nothing exists to transform them. The leap from dream to machine, severed by the absence of metal, the world without power, is not only a world without light and motion, it is a world without acceleration, where history crawls instead of sprints, where every innovation struggles under the same ceiling, and the silence of what never comes, the hum of cities at night, the glow of bulbs against the dark, the roar of engines carrying humanity forward, hangs heavy over the centuries, a reminder of what was possible, but never allowed to be. To walk through this alternate history is to feel haunted by absence, to see not only what is, but the heavy shadow of what could have been, the silent echoes of cities never built, bridges never spanned, engines never roared, as if the world itself is wrapped in a fog of unrealized futures. Imagine standing on a hill, looking down at scattered villages huddled in valleys, and in the mind's eye you see ghostly silhouettes of towers, bridges of steel stretching across rivers, roads carved straight and true into mountains. But when you blink, they vanish, replaced again by dirt paths and wooden huts. A reminder that in this world ambition is always throttled by fragility. Humanity survives, yes, but survival is not destiny. Survival is not greatness. And the absence of metal keeps progress chained, dragging each generation into the same struggles as the last, repeating them endlessly. And yet in quiet moments of reflection, some must sense that something is missing, that the world feels smaller than it should, that possibilities press against unseen walls, a kind of cosmic claustrophobia, whispering into their dreams. Myths, too, become saturated with this shadow. Stories of gods wielding weapons, not of wood but of shining light. Legends of lost ages when people soared on wings that did not break, when fires were trapped in cages of strength, when mountains yielded secrets that reshaped existence. Fragments of memory that never happened yet linger like inherited nostalgia. Even in this fragile world, human imagination senses the gap, the road not taken, the ladder never climbed, and fills it with longing, a collective ache for futures denied. It is in these shadows that humanity feels its greatest tragedy. Not famine, not conflict, not fragility, but the sense that something vast has been stolen. So, meet destiny ripped away before it could begin. And so the human story becomes one of ghosts, not of ancestors but of descendants, haunting the present with their absence, reminding each generation of what they might have been if only they had discovered the fire hidden in the veins of the earth. The shadow of what could have been is not merely a thought experiment, it is a weight pressing upon every story, every myth, every ritual, an invisible presence that shapes lives even as it remains unnamed. For though no one in this world has seen iron or steel, somewhere in the depths of human spirit, there lingers the unshakable intuition that something more was possible, that greatness was near, that the world was meant to be larger than it is, and it is this haunting that defines their existence more than any hunger or war, the haunting of unrealized futures, forever out of reach. And so we arrive at the last threshold, the moment where history itself bends into silence, and we must ask the question that lingers like smoke in the air. Was metal the true Promethean fire, the secret gift that lifted us from the endless twilight of fragility into the blinding blaze of progress, or was humanity destined, even without it, to find another path, slower perhaps, stranger perhaps, but no less inevitable? Imagine standing at the mouth of a cave, stone blade in one hand, the vast sky above filled with stars that will never be reached, and you feel the weight of both possibilities pressing down. One, a world of permanence, skyscrapers, rockets, satellites, endless horizons conquered. The other, world of cycles, fragile villages, whispered myths, and eternal repetition. And you cannot decide which is truer, which belongs to us. Is our civilization, with its steel bridges and glowing cities, proof that we were always meant to break free? Or is it an accident of geology, a twist of chance that gave us ore beneath our feet and the fire to release it? An accident that could just as easily have been denied. The final question is not only about history, but about identity. Are we creatures of destiny, fated to rise no matter the obstacles, or creatures of luck, forever at the mercy of what the earth chooses to reveal? If metal is the axis upon which our story turns, then what does that say about the fragility of everything we have built? The skyscrapers, the satellites, the machines humming in our veins of power, all of it dependent on a discovery that might never have been. All of it precarious, all of it perhaps temporary. And yet, if humanity could imagine gods in the sky while trapped on the ground, if it could carve eternity into stone while knowing stone crumbles, if it could survive centuries with nothing but wood, bone, and fire, perhaps the true gift is not metal at all but imagination, the stubborn refusal to surrender, the will to dream even when denied the means. And so the final question lingers, heavier than iron, sharper than steel, brighter than gold. Is metal the foundation of our greatness, or merely a tool we happened upon in a universe of infinite possibilities? And if it is only chance, then what other futures lie buried still, hidden in the silence of the earth, waiting to be uncovered, or waiting to be forever missed? Without metal, humanity might still be scratching the earth with stone tools, whispering stories under the stars. But because we unlocked bronze, iron, and steel, we carved empires, built machines, and reached the cosmos. Metal is not just a material, it is the skeleton of civilization. If you want more journeys into alternate history, forbidden timelines, and the mysteries of human survival, stay with us. This is not the end. It is only the beginning of asking, what if?